Shall we have a quick look at what Gavin had to say in his apology?
Please, go ahead.
I reiterate my apology made to the complainant following the breach. I apologise to them again now, and I apologise to the House fully and unreservedly.
I mean, I think it's a bit like putting people in the stocks. You make them abase themselves when they've had a row with somebody. But aren't you allowed to argue with people who are equal or in higher status to you in an organisation?
Well, Jacob, I want to know what happened to the Conservative Party. Like you say, we're in wet wipe territory, and I think it's right that he apologises. He was in the wrong. However, I think you're also right to highlight the fact that this drawn-out process, protracted process, almost performatively punishing him for what was ultimately a quite minor transgression. I think it says quite a lot about politics, but I think also the facts of the matter are that he should have apologised because it was unprofessional conduct.
He should definitely apologise for being rude. I'm all in favour of that. But it's the formal sanction of making him in the chamber of the House of Commons stand up and apologise. As I said in monologue, the ICGS I think is really important, but it's there to protect staff of the House of Commons from MPs who abuse their position, or actually, more often than not, more than MPs, it's been of their seniors within Parliament, within the professional element of Parliament, who have behaved inappropriately, to use that awful word, or have bullied them. It's not there for MPs dealing with each other, is it?
Well, look, I'm inclined to agree, and I think what he was doing was lashing out in a situation where ultimately he was powerless. And I think you're right to say there's a huge difference between that and bullying. In fact, it's the polar opposite. However, when you have rules, when you have a process, the point is that everybody has to adhere to them at all times. And I think as a sort of protocol that one is meant to uphold as a professional legislator, he fell short of the standards. And I have to say, the language he also used in regards to an aide, where he talked about the slitting of a throat, that's alleged, I should say.
That was a different matter. That wasn't...
Of course.
That wasn't part of this inquiry.
But it's additive, and I think it does... If this was a court of law, somebody would say it's their first-time offence, is this person of good character, and so on. And so I can see why it played against him, if you're trying to sort of play devil's advocate here.
But Gavin enjoys playing up to the image of the Chief Whip. I mean, he had a tarantula in his office and that sort of thing. He likes the power plays of politics and the House of Cards approach of Francis Urquhart in that. Nonetheless, I think it's still harsh to go on that and then say, well, look, you've been rude to your successor, and therefore you have to base yourself in Parliament. It just seems to me to be disproportionate, and that the Commissioner got it right when he said, basically, yes, this was very rude, yes, you shouldn't have said this, but no, it's not really a matter for me as standards, it's a matter for you as a moral individual to apologise privately if that's what you want to do.
What I find really interesting about this whole sort of carry-on is that the basis of it was basically a grievance over whether or not he could attend the Queen's funeral. I just find it strange that there's a jockeying for position amongst your colleagues with regards to state events and things like this. Now, I'm sure he held the Queen in great affection.
I think asking for tickets to events of this kind is not the sort of behaviour that I would encourage. I don't disagree with you on that at all. And people were doing it, obviously, for the coronation of the Queen's funeral. I think you wait your turn in these events, and that it doesn't look good for Gavin to have been demanding to go to a funeral at all. I completely agree with that. There's a big difference between doing something that's a little bit grubby and doing something that you have to be punished for. Isn't there?
Well, I just feel that, right now, our political class is held in such low esteem by the public, and you might say that's wrong, you might say that's right.
Oh, it's always the way.
You
can go back to Cicero saying that politicians aren't as they were a few decades
Partly,
before.
but I think that there are certain professions which are clearly held in much lower esteem than they were 30, 40 years ago. Journalists, business people, politicians, and like you say, that ebbs and flows. The banks, for instance, 60, 70 years ago, a bank manager was the quintessence of respectability and, the staid middle class. After 2008, very much not the case.
You say that, but who is the big figure of fun in Dad's army? It's the bank manager. And that's 50, 60 years ago. So I think we tend to look at the past through rose-tinted spectacles. I mean, I'm guilty of this myself quite a lot, but we didn't put people on quite such a pedestal, and we were certainly happy to mock people in authority. And there's a great English tradition of doing this. You look at the wonderful cartoons, the late 18th and early 19th century, the Rowlandsons and Gilrays and so on.
But what, you know, you're a very gentlemanly person. You're a very genteel person. I don't agree with you necessarily on many political issues. You're clearly a very affable, principled person. I might disagree on certain principles, but you can discuss those amicably. I think that the sort of language of veiled threats through text messages, first of all, if you're a professional politician, you shouldn't be threatening anybody in written communication. It just screams amateurishness, especially for somebody who, again, he was working very closely with the British Armed Forces, the kinds of things that could be compromise on him. Amateurish, you know, the analogous sort of political figure, say, in Russia or in the United States, wouldn't dare behave like that. And I think, actually, in a way, Gavin Williamson, he didn't really recognise or understand the position of seniority he held. And I think that's why, you're right, he's being publicly vilified as a result. But I think if he was just a little, you know, non-entity backbencher, none of this would be happening.